Okay, we're recording.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome everybody to the public input meeting for the reconstruction of North 3rd Street from DeMers Avenue to University Avenue here in Grand Forks. Today is June 23rd, 2020, and we're conducting this meeting via Zoom. This information will also be posted after the meeting for additional chances for comment, and we'll get into that a little later in the meeting. Those of you who did request the Zoom link should have received an email that has two links in it. The first one is a sign-in sheet, and the second one is a North Dakota Department of Transportation Title VI participation survey. The links to these items will also be available with the posted meeting materials after the meeting recording is posted. And we would appreciate that if you would take a minute or two and complete those and submit them for the project record. What we'd like to accomplish today is to give a brief overview of the proposed improvements along the corridor. And a lot of the improvements will stay the same throughout the alternatives that are being considered at this time. But there are a few different geometric alternatives, different layouts that are being considered for the improvements. So we want to make you aware of those. And then the last thing and the most important thing about today is the opportunity to give your input. So there'll be a number of ways to do that, both during the meeting and after. But again, that's our primary focus today, is to present the alternatives and to gather your input. So please, take the time to let us know what you think about the project. A couple of tips for how to do that. Our presentation today will take about 20 to 25 minutes. And during the meeting, if you do have a question, you can raise your hand. Those of you on by phone can press *9. And on the computer, you should have a participants icon. If you click on that, you can click on the raise hand button. If you're on a tablet, you just have to click more in that dialog box before you get the raise your hand option. And then we also have a chat option. If either you prefer to comment via chat in written form, we will verbalize your comments if they're received during the meeting and answer them here if they're questions. And you can also use that option if you don't have audio capabilities, but please use the everyone group chat so that those who are in attendance can see those questions. But again, we will be responding verbally. We also have some individuals here that are available for tech support. If you do need any assistance, please send a private chat to me and we'll help you if you are having some issues with your audio. And again, we will have additional opportunities to comment so that if you think about this information that you see today and would like to present some additional comments or questions later, there will be additional opportunity to do that, and we'll explain that to you at the end of the presentation. So getting into the proposed improvements themselves, the project corridor is located along North 3rd Street in Grand Forks, and the limits are from DeMers Avenue to University Avenue. And a couple of the landmarks that you can see on the screen here include the Town Square Park and also the Chamber of Commerce building over here. So just to give you an idea of where the project is located. The project is being developed to correct existing deficiencies along the project corridor. Some of those are obvious to those who walk down the street and some are not. The pavement that exists today is aging. It was reconstructed back in 1933. And right now there's about 5 inches of concrete pavement out there that has a base underneath, that the thickness of that base is not known. And that concrete was overlaid with asphalt later on in life, back in the 90s. But it's been a while since there's been major construction on this stretch of road. And so it is exhibiting deterioration. And most of those distresses that are evident in the pavement include the joints from the concrete pavement reflecting up through the asphalt. There are other cracks that are not along those concrete joints that are present out there. And that combined with some of the bumps and sags in the pavement and the patching that's been done on the pavement over time, all also contribute to a deterioration in the ride quality of the road. And so the project is necessary to improve that aging infrastructure. Pavement deteriorates at an exponential rate as it gets older, and so staying ahead of that is essential to having good facilities in town and maintaining the connectivity in our transportation system. We also want to address ADA compliance along the project corridor and make some improvements to the accessible pedestrian facilities along 3rd Street. The project is being facilitated by the City of Grand Forks and administered through the North Dakota Department of Transportation local government. It'll be funded generally with about 80.93% urban grant program funds. However, there is a cap on those funds at $2.4 million, and the remaining costs will be paid with local funds. It's currently scheduled to be bid in the spring of 2021, with construction to begin and be completed in the 2021 construction season. The proposed improvements will obviously include roadway reconstruction, and along with that, some curb extensions, which are commonly referred to as bump outs, as you saw on the DeMers Avenue project recently. Improvements to the ADA facilities, new street lighting, and also a number of streetscape features, which we'll discuss in more detail here shortly. And the big thing with the streetscape features is that those proposed improvements are really consistent with the City of Grand Forks' planning objectives for the downtown area, and they tie in nicely with the recent projects like the DeMers Avenue reconstruction. Again, we'll describe these features in a little more detail, but we have prepared a rendering of what these features may look like once the project is constructed. So here you have a rather bird's eye view of if you were hovering above DeMers Avenue and looking down toward Gateway Drive. Some of these features may move slightly or change slightly, but the base geometric alternative that we're looking at has this approximate configuration, and you can see some of the streetscaping features, the street lights, things like that. So this is what we anticipate would be a rough appearance after the project was constructed, depending on the alternative selected. Getting back to the streetscape features in detail, what those would include would be decorative sidewalks, seat planters, which would be planting beds that are raised up and have a concrete perimeter on them that can be used as a seating area for downtown residents and visitors, bases for future decorative lighting, and other functional things such as bike racks, benches, garbage cans, recycling bins, and those features would be similar to those recently constructed on DeMers. And these photos that are coming up in the slides here are photos of the actual features that were constructed on DeMers Avenue. So here you see the decorative sidewalk, which includes different colored pavers. And those pavers are all the way from the curb to the existing buildings, as they would be on this project. This is an example of what the seat planter would look like. This was taken at a time when the growing season was not active, but if you can envision, there would be some low flowering plants in the middle of this, and quite attractive feature. Again, some other decorative features would include planters around the new trees that would be planted downtown, and some benches and some lower planting areas, bicycle racks, and again, features that tie in with that look. This is a conceptual appearance of what the block from First Avenue to 2nd Avenue would look like. This is the brownstone building. And this is just an example of what you might see once this project is constructed, with some of the various proposed features out here. And again, some of the street lighting would be similar to that new lighting along DeMers and the decorative streetscape features as well. Some of the impacts that we anticipate this project might have are mostly temporary in nature. Any construction project, of course, is going to have temporary impacts to vehicle, pedestrian, and bicycle routes. There will be detours in place for those during the construction. We are going to further discuss the pedestrian routes a little later in the presentation, specifically as relates to business access. Another potential impact is tree replacement. However, we have consulted forestry specialists in that regard, and we have determined that the existing trees in the downtown area are reaching the end of their healthy, useful life. And those foresters have recommended and agree with the recommendation that's made to replace those trees. There are also some historical resources downtown and cultural resources. We are in a historic district downtown, and so we are going to protect those resources in place with things like limited vibration to limit effects on the adjacent buildings and other items. There was a question posed in the chat that on DeMers there were tracks that were found, and may they be here as well? And the answer to that is it's entirely possible. There is the old depot here, of course. However, we have done some research, and there are some old construction drawings that exist that show that those tracks were there but have since been removed. So we anticipate, based on that, that they are already gone. However, we will be watching for those, and we'll be dealing with the appropriate authorities in that regard if we do encounter something like that during construction. The other impact that is probably the most forefront for most people that will be interested in this project is the business access. And we do intend to have the business accesses open throughout the entire duration of the project. There will be some limited times where work is necessary directly in front of a business entrance, for example, when the sidewalk right outside the door is constructed. However, we intend to have it a project requirement that a lot of that work be conducted outside the hours that those specific businesses are operating. So we intend to minimize those impacts to the extent possible. And following the project construction, we do anticipate positive impacts as well, such as improved roadway condition, enhanced pedestrian safety and ADA accessibility, and also the enhanced downtown streetscape appearance. We talked a little bit about property and pedestrian access during construction. This slide may be a little bit to take in. However, the important thing that we really want to show here is that during the different phases of the project, for how the roadway is constructed, there are going to be designated pedestrian routes along the project corridor. And as you can see, there are green pedestrian routes in front of all the buildings at any given time. And so we do anticipate that those entrances will remain open. You may have to be on one side of the street or the other. And again, there will be a temporary impact when the sidewalk right in front of a business is worked on. However, we are going to make every effort to minimize those impacts. The current geometric alternatives under consideration included various configurations of driving lanes. How wide would the driving lanes be? Parking lanes, what type of parking would be included? Would it be diagonal parking? Would it be parallel parking? Would we include bike lanes along the roadway, or Sharrows where the bicycles and the vehicles have a wider lane to share between them? And also, how wide would the sidewalks and boulevards be? And to explain the difference between a sidewalk and boulevard, the sidewalk and boulevard is the area between the road, so behind the curb, and the building. And the sidewalk, for our purposes of this discussion, is going to refer to the area that is graded to be ADA accessible. So the boulevard would be the remaining area that may be of a little greater slope than allowed by ADA, but is still available for things like street lights, site furnishings, and some of those decorative features. The first layout that we will discuss today is what we're going to call the basis layout. And the only reason that we call it that is because when we compare the pros and cons of the alternatives, this will be the basis for comparison. And the reason for that is it's pretty similar to what exists today. It'll have diagonal parking on one side of the road and parallel parking on the other side of the road. And the driving lanes, parking lanes, the widths of those will be governed by standard, and the remaining area will be used for boulevard and sidewalk area. Additional alternatives on top of that both include changing that diagonal parking on one side to parallel parking so that both sides of the road would have parallel parking. And one of those options would include a wider berm area, and the other would include Sharrow lanes, and also a little bit wider berm area, but the widening of the available space would be more to accommodate the bicycle facility. And so on this slide here, what you see is what I'll call the basis layout. And again, this shows the streetscape features aren't shown here for clarity purposes, but this shows what the roadway would generally look like if we had the new bump outs at the intersections, diagonal parking on one side, parallel parking on the other. And so you'll notice there that the one side of the roadway is a little wider than the other because of the necessity for the parking to be a little wider. But the sidewalk and boulevard areas are the same on both sides of the road. And how that would look in general, if you were standing looking down 3rd Street, is kind of this top figure. And so you would see the area kind of behind the curb where the pedestrians are. And that would be the sidewalk area. The boulevard, again, a little more slope on it where all the features are located. And you come to the roadway, and we have the diagonal on one side and parallel parking on the other. The bottom figure here demonstrates what this would look like at the intersections where the curb extensions or bump outs are located. So you can see there again where the walking areas would be and how those features would fit in. So if we got rid of the diagonal parking on the one side of the road and went to parallel parking on both sides, you gain actually quite a bit of space because that dimension goes from 18 feet down to 9 feet for the parallel parking versus the diagonal parking. And so this alternative here, we have taken that available space and moved it into the berm area, so the boulevard and the sidewalk. And you see that our sidewalk has now increased to 10 feet in width with a 9-foot boulevard. Other than that, the dimensions of the bump outs, everything like that stays the same. The other alternative that was considered is, again, changing the diagonal parking to parallel parking, but with the available width that results, some of that was included or implemented in the driving lanes to make them into Sharrow lanes, so shared vehicle and bicycle lanes. And instead of 11.5 feet, those lanes now become 14 feet wide each. And then the remaining 2 feet on each side was distributed back into the sidewalk area. So you can see in the geometric layout on the top of this slide that, again, the roadway itself gets a little narrower. The berm area gets a little wider, and most of that space is taken up in the driving lane area. So the first question downtown that pops up a lot is, well, how much parking is there going to be? And because of that, we've provided this slide for consideration today. It's important to note that even on the basis layout, we will lose a few parking stalls from what exists today. Out in the project area today, there are 88 parking stalls, and 8 of those are lost by adding the bump outs to the intersection. So basically 1 at each quadrant of each intersection in the middle. And then another 4 are lost due to ADA considerations and other geometric modifications. So that leaves us with 74 parking stalls. Changing the diagonal parking to parallel parking, we lose another about 16 parking stalls, bringing us down to a total of 58 within the project area. We did discuss already with the driving lane, but the other summary information that's provided here is again the change to the boulevard and sidewalk areas. So what you see here in the table is the total width behind the curb, and that would include the boulevard and the sidewalk together. So how much room is there between the building and the road, essentially, is that dimension. And also the passable width behind the curb. And that's not necessarily the sidewalk or the ADA area, but it's the width between the building and where any potential obstructions in the walkway would be. And so you can see here that in the beginning we have a 6-foot sidewalk, but 7 feet is passable before we may run into some of those decorative features. And going to parallel parking on both sides with the wider berm gives us an additional 5 feet of passable area. And doing the Sharrows and putting a little bit extra on the berm areas gives us about an additional 2 feet of passable area. Some other general pros and cons between the alternatives currently under consideration. We did talk about the widths of the berms, but the parallel parking as opposed to diagonal parking does give better pedestrian visibility at the crosswalks because the vehicles don't stick out as far. And so when a pedestrian approaches the roadway, they can see past those cars much more easily, and also the cars traveling can see those pedestrians sooner. So there is that gain. Another benefit of the Sharrow lane option is that the current bicycle network has a route from University Avenue to the Greenway. So it goes from University Avenue to 2nd Avenue and then on to the Greenway. And this would extend that bike route over to DeMers Avenue. As far as cons compared to the basis layout, both of the other alternatives have fewer parking spaces. With the parallel parking on both sides and the wider berms, we feel that there will be the greater potential for bikes to use the sidewalks. That process is currently not allowed by city ordinance, but you do see it quite a bit by people who either don't know or just are in a hurry and want to go where they want to go. So having that wider sidewalk area does encourage the potential for that. And there is a potential hazard there for example, if somebody's coming out of a business and a bicycle is coming down the sidewalk, they can run into that door and cause injury to one or the other person. And the other thing that results from narrowing or the roadway down a little bit is the additional cost that comes from utility relocations and other things that come from changing the existing location of the curb from today to the end of construction tomorrow, so to speak. The changes to that overall geometric layout do result in additional costs from relocations of those things. Regarding the Sharrow lanes, a couple other things that came up as cons as compared to the basis layout are that the geometrics do not accommodate a left turn lane at DeMers Avenue. So having those lanes in there, having those wider lanes, there's not enough room left over for a third lane for that turn lane. And so at DeMers Avenue, that option would require just a single through lane that would accommodate the right turns and the left turns at DeMers as well. And then also, with the addition of the Sharrow route to DeMers Avenue, the nearest connection from there is at Kitson and 5th, which is a number of blocks away. And again, that connection could be provided in the future. However, it just doesn't exist today. And there's also been mention that potential vehicle parking encroachments, if the snow removal doesn't go all the way back to the curb, could essentially put that driving lane width back at the standard width as if there was no Sharrow. And so with that, that concludes our general presentation. And we do have a couple of comments that have come in on the chat. So just for reference purposes, we do have a slide in case we need to point at something here. We can also go back to some of the other slides in the presentation. But the first question we have is from Kristen Sperry, and it says, is there a historic preservation committee in Grand Forks? Have they reviewed the proposed streetscape in historic areas? So the answer to that is there is a historical society, and they will be reviewing that. We are currently waiting on the cultural resource inventory because we hope to share that information at the same time. So we definitely do want to get that input from the local historic society. And there also is, again, the Historic Preservation District downtown. So we definitely are aware of that. Another chat question that comes in is from James. Question is, how much would the upgrades on the roads limit parking, or will it be the same? So in regards to that question, again, the base layout would decrease parking from 88 parking stalls down to 74. And if we went to parallel parking on both sides, we'd be down to 58 stalls. He has another question here too. Have you thought on the side streets off of North 3rd on will this affect how the future looks for those side streets? As far as that, the answer to that is yes and no. As far as the side streets go, those streetscapes are not included here. However, they would be considered when those streets were constructed. The downtown development committee has been working very diligently to provide improvements and continuity downtown. However, those projects are not programmed right now. And so depending on when they would be programmed and considered, those improvements would be considered separately. But I would venture to say that how the adjacent streets look would definitely play a part in how those were developed.
Hand raised there too.
Do you guys mind if I jump in here?
No, go right ahead.
So I have more of a comment than a question right now. So while I am a downtown business owner, I also have been part of the downtown multimodal transportation study. And we're meeting on Friday to talk about essentially, we've really narrowed down some of the recommendations we're going to make to the city. And right now, one of the main topics we're discussing pretty heavily is working in a bike lane on 4th Street in an effort to kind of divert bicycle traffic off of 5th and 3rd, which tend to have more car traffic. And under that plan, there isn't a whole lot of diagonal parking on 4th, but it would require eliminating diagonal parking in the few places there are and moving it to all parallel. So there would be some loss of parking on that street. It's pretty nominal. But I think that, communicating with KLJ or somehow getting these two groups on the same page seems to be pretty important. Because I really think the decision that is made on 3rd Street and the decision that are made on 4th should be complementary, rather than redundant or conflicting.
No, absolutely agreed there. And I think too, again, that's one of the reasons why the base option is for that regular driving lane configuration in anticipation of that possibility on 4th Street. The other options still remain, of course, as a being available or under consideration. But that's one of the reasons why the basis option is indicated as such. But definitely agreed that continuity should be achieved, and we can certainly reach out to them as well.
Yeah, and then and I don't know. Like I said, we meet this week, so I think after this Friday meeting, there'll be a lot more certainty with that, but feel pretty confident that that is going to be a recommendation made to the city, putting in a protected bike lane on 4th. You know, and I know that there's a lot of talk about, there's a lot of people pushing to push this project back a year, but if it were to go off, you know, as planned sooner rather than later, you know, that would probably, this project would happen before the 4th Street bike lane because of all the construction that's going on with the Argyle and whatnot. So, you know, I just want to make sure everybody's communicating and on the same page, and that we're working together so that it's not affecting decisions down the road.
That's a very good point. We would definitely be interested in the outcome of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'll bring that up on Friday, and I'm sure you guys have contacts at KLJ, or if you'd like me to connect you.
Yep, absolutely. And if there's a specific person that you have that sits on that committee, if you want to shoot over their contact info, that'd be great.
Yeah. Mike Bittner is the guy, but if you'd like me to email you his info, I can do that.
No, I've got it. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Cool.
All right. I don't see any other questions coming in on the group chat. Does anyone have any other questions that they'd like to ask verbally? All right. If not, that was the extent of the prepared presentation today, but we do want to remind everybody that this isn't the end of the opportunity to provide input. You can always provide input from now until you don't have it anymore. However, the comment period to get your comments on the project record will remain open until July 8th, 2020. The recording of this meeting, as well as other pertinent information, will be posted on grandforksgov.com, and the path to that information is provided here in this slide. You go to Government, click on that, click on Meeting Information and Meeting Calendar, and then on the calendar for today's date, you would click on Public Input Meeting for North 3rd Street, and those resources will be available there. You can also submit comment by simply emailing me and noting public input in the subject heading. There is also on the sign-in sheet that you would have received as a meeting attendee an option to submit your comments in writing that way. Or if you'd like, you can request a comment form either by emailing me or calling me at 701-746-7459. So again, we look forward to hearing anything that you may think of later on in those forms, and you can certainly email with questions as well. Be happy to address those as they come in. For tonight, we will be available until the 7 p.m. published time via this Zoom link. So if there is anything that you think of and you'd like to post on that, certainly welcome to do so. But otherwise, we would thank you for your input and for your time, and really glad you could attend with us this evening.
Thank you.